Hang on, let me go ask my kids to be a little quiet.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Co-Design Work with Wonder. I'm June Bea, CEO of Bea Group, and today I have a special guest with me. His name is Sairam Suresh, and he's joining me with some tips for the hiring process. Hi, Sairam.
Hi, how are you?
Good. It's so nice to see you. And
too.
I'm so excited that you're here because you have been so supportive and helpful for us in so many different aspects of what we're doing with Work Wonder. One, you came during the summer to give some tips for interviews to our interns. We have a recorded session from that. And then when we were hiring our interns, you really coached my team and helped us with the hiring process because truthfully, I haven't really hired people in a long time. Certainly not in the way that I would like to have our interns experience. So I really appreciate what you've done to help support us. And now we've hired our 10 interns, and we just
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. And you were instrumental with just helping us with the questions and then also the feedback and whatnot. So just for us to have a process of what happens in industry. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what you've done with regard to hiring so that we have some context about what you do for your day job.
Sure. So my name's Sairam. I do primarily what I've been doing for the last long time has been software engineering and engineering management generally. I think I run teams today, and I've run teams for the last couple of companies that I've worked at, most recently Amazon. And the thing that we do there a lot is hiring. So we spend a lot of time looking for candidates, looking through resumes, trying to find some really great engineers. So I think I brought a lot of that kind of, hard-earned lessons to the last talk with your interns, and then obviously to your team to help them understand how to hire great people.
Yes. So we wanted to do something which is demystify the hiring process because we were working with our interns, there were a number of folks that we didn't hire, and we really wanted to give some tips for what to do next time. And so it was one of our intentions is, well, what employers won't tell you. We want to be able to peek behind the curtain of what some of our thinking was when we didn't go forward with certain candidates with regard to interviewing, and then what happened when we didn't hire. And so that's the intention of today's live stream. So we have some tips. So I'm just going to share really quick some of the tips that we came up with. And
so so I have some frame of reference, June. How many candidates did you have for these positions?
So we had 34 candidates.
Wow.
Yeah. And at the time we weren't entirely sure. So we had 34 candidates. We had invited all 180 interns to who we had over the summer to apply. So this was the chance to go a step further. So in the summer, we had them for 6 weeks. And then this was an opportunity to focus more on work for Bea Group. And so we wanted to hire interns to help run this live stream. We wanted them to help us create some videos that were from the summer. So we had specific tasks that we wanted them to complete. So we had their job posting for that. And then they had a certain period of time, and we asked for a cover letter and a resume.
Right.
And then there was a period of time. Then we conducted interviews with a select number. And then we selected 10. Cool. So this is our suggestions for those who did not get hired to really think about for next time, because this is, again, because they were our interns, we wanted to make sure that it was a meaningful experience. So we wanted to demystify the hiring process with this live stream. And our first tip is really to have attention to detail. So, and I'm just going to run through these, and then Sairam, you and I can just sort of revisit them.
Yeah.
So first is attention to detail, and we'll go into more of what that means. And the second is just previous work experience. So for us, we had experience with all of these applicants because they are among the 180. So we did take into account performance in the past. But I'm curious for you what work experience means when you're hiring, when you may not have folks that you have worked with before. So we'll talk some about that. And then also to think about not necessarily what a candidate would get for themselves from the job, but what we were looking for, what they would bring to the company, what they would bring with regard to being an asset to the team. So those are some of the 3 key tips that we wanted to talk about today. So yeah, let's go with attention to detail.
Yeah. So I think, so for you, you knew a lot of these candidates before. And so you had some idea already of what their work product looked like, right? How they interacted with people, how they delivered, communication. And so you already knew a little bit of kind of how they would perform in that respect. So, in your interviews with them, now you went through their resumes and you decided which ones you thought might be good fits for your full-time internships. In your interviews, what kind of data did you get from your questions that led you to believe people maybe weren't that great with attention to detail?
Well, even before the interview. So because we had 34 candidates, we did not even interview half, right? So even to make it to the interview, it was really important for us to really look closely at the cover letter and resume. Well, one, we had a deadline. So we said it was due by midnight on a certain day.
Right.
So automatically, the attention to detail was if you missed the deadline, you were already disqualified.
Yep.
So that was one, because it was something that we had stressed during our summer internship, which was make deadlines. There are unforgivable deadlines, right? And that is one of them, is when something is said to be due at a certain point, then we take it seriously, right? So that automatically disqualified a couple candidates. And then it was interesting because it seemed some candidates just were putting out their cover letters and resume. They were incorrect. It was not the job that we posted. So in some cases, it was for an entirely different job in a whole, like food service, right? We were not hiring servers, or the address to the company was not correct. So in this day and age, it's so simple. Bea Group is online. Our address is on the website. And they work for us.
They should know, right? They should definitely know who you are. I think, I think it's very interesting, right? Today, it's very different than when we were getting into the work life, the job arena, and you would send out physical paper resumes and cover letters to like a dozen companies by mail, and then hope to hear back from someone, pre-email in those days. But today, really, I think what employers expect is a individually crafted resume, right? If you're applying for a specific position, do your research, right? Understand what it is that they're looking for and what you might be expected to show them in that role, and make sure your resume reflects that. Make sure you say, here's some things I did that relate to what you're looking for, right? So your resume should be different from this company that you're applying to another company. That shouldn't be the exact same resume.
Right. So, and then the other part is, so I write for a living, right? I'm a grant writer, and sentence structure, right? Having capitalization, grammar, spelling. So those are things that are easy, again, to weed out. It's especially now with spell check on pretty much every platform.
There's no excuse.
It's really inexcusable, right?
Yeah.
In addition, there are folks who could help you proofread, and it's important before sending it in, because to me, why bother if you're not going to put your best foot forward?
Right.
Because it's not just putting it out there. It's really putting out your best. And so I would say that's what, for us, we meant by attention to detail. But I'm curious for you, when you were interviewing for Amazon, like what were some of those that you wish you could have told candidates?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the thing that always got me excited about a candidate was when they knew something about the role that I was hiring for, to the point where they could express interest in something specific, right? So if they were just applying for a job and they were just looking for a paycheck, they weren't as interested as someone who was they weren't as interesting to me as someone who'd come in and say, I really love the service that you are managing, and here's some interesting things that I learned about it when I was researching this role. Because then we could have a conversation, right? Your interview turns into just a really nice flowing conversation.
Mhm.
And for me, that means they did their homework. They spent some time before the interview to really learn about the job, right? So that for me is the kind of attention to detail that I cared about. If people came in and were just kind of sloppy and just said, yeah, I want a job here. That's nice.
Yeah.
There's other places you could apply for.
I have to say, I'm going to make a pitch for old school thank yous. That
Sure.
to me is another tip, in that of the candidates, even of the ones we hired, we only received one thank you. And
Yeah.
I definitely know when I was hired at UCLA, one of the things that I had done right after my interview was send a thank you note. And I remember my boss, even back then, had said, I really stood out because I had taken the time to send a physical card and thank her for interviewing me. And so those are really simple gestures that go a long way, because when you're trying to stand out, it's important to do, that's the attention to detail.
Yeah.
So
It's very easy. I mean, with email, it's very, very easy to do, right? You know the person's email who is interviewing you, or at least you can find them on LinkedIn. So you should drop them a line on LinkedIn and say, hey, thanks. I enjoyed our conversation, right?
Yeah, right. Or, thanks for taking the time to meet with me, right? It's also a nice way as an opening for, hey, could we stay in touch, right? So
I've stayed in touch with people that I've interviewed, and it's been great, right? You're almost like, I couldn't give you this position for whatever reason. Sometimes we had more applicants than we had openings, but it's not like they were unqualified. And they've connected with me on LinkedIn, and I've followed their progress, and they followed mine. And it's been nice, so it's definitely worth keeping in touch with people that made a good impression on you.
Exactly. So Dr. I, chiming in, and I mean, granted, I might be old school, but those handwritten notes I love, especially now. Getting mail that's not a bill is awesome, right? So that's another one for those of you who are just curious on how to stand out. I would say that's a simple gesture, right? And another one would be the questions. Like, I remember doing interviews with some of the candidates, and one person asked me this question that really stood out. And she said, what would success look like for this role, right? And I thought, oh my gosh, she won me over for that.
That's a great question. Yeah, it's very thoughtful. I love giving people the advice as a candidate to ask hard questions, right? To come in prepared with some questions about the competition, right? Or about challenges that the company's facing. And it's not to say you're going to be a jerk, right? And say, how come your competition's doing so much better than you guys are? Not in that way, but certainly to both show that you're thoughtful about the business, right? At a higher level than just maybe what you're going to be working on. And also to be, to demonstrate interest in, hey, how can I best help you? How can I best solve the problems that you guys are having? Tell me about those problems, right? And if you come in with those kind of questions prepared, with questions that might be tricky for an interviewer to answer, that definitely is impressive, right?
Yes. Yeah. So let's move on to the next one, which was our work experience. So for us, it was, I kept track of a lot during the 6-week internship we had. And I kept track of who turned things in on time and who missed deadlines. And so for sure, if there were missed deadlines, and certainly more than one occasion, even though they had an amazing cover letter and resume, that previous experience was something that I leaned on, because while I was wowed by the cover letter and resume, I had to really think back on what it mean when it came time to perform, right? So they didn't move forward in the interview because of our previous experience. So yeah.
Were there things that came out in the interview that were sort of red flags? Were there things that you would ask people questions about their previous work experience, either with you in the internship or previously, that gave you pause, that you thought, I'm not so sure about this?
Yeah, there was a candidate who did express that, I can't remember the question I asked, but it was too revealing in the sense of maybe she was too self-deprecating in the sense of, revealing that she tended to procrastinate and 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 it was a struggle, right? Like that was kind of a red flag. While it was honest, it was like too much information because that certainly because I am such a stickler about deadlines, right? I think it would have been maybe how she overcame being a procrastinator would have been a better example versus that I'm struggling with this still. So that was a red flag for me.
For me, one of the questions that I consistently use is one of at Amazon we use the term ownership, and so for me, I always ask the question, can you talk about an experience that you had, a time that you went out of your way to do something that you saw needed to get done, and it was outside of your area of responsibility, right? It wasn't your job, it wasn't your team's focus or your specific focus, but it needed to get done, and you knew how to do it, or you knew what needed to be done. So you just did it. You just took it on yourself. And I think if you've worked long enough, you've done this at least once or twice, right? There's lots of situations where you're like, if I have to wait for someone else to do this, it'll never get done. So I'm just going to do it.
Right.
And to me, that always kind of reveals something about someone's past experience that speaks to their personality. Are they someone who's going to be an owner, right? Are they going to say that's not my job, that's someone else's problem, or are they going to say, this, I didn't know how to do this and someone had to figure it out, so I figured it out and I got it done. And that's super interesting as a candidate.
Yes. I mean, I liked when you came and you were a guest speaker and you gave those pro tips that, we're really just trying to have a conversation. And what are the bottom line was they're trying to get to know whether you can do the job.
Right.
And
right.
I just thought that's amazing.
To recap really quickly, the kind of three things as an employer, you want to know are, is a person capable? Are they competent? Do they have the right skill set to do this job? And that comes out for me, right, in interviews with engineering questions, right, coding questions. Can you solve this coding problem? Can you demonstrate, that kind of experience that gives me confidence that you can code when you get hired. And for an accountant, those are going to be something related to accounting questions, or for depending on the job. So that's one. The second thing was, are you someone that we're going to get along well, or who's going to be a good fit here culturally, who has the right set of values, right? So that's, basically, do we want to work with you? Like, are you going to be tough to work with for whatever reason? And that's kind of the second area that we probe. And the third area really is, are you motivated to stick around? Are you motivated to be here? Or is this just, a stepping stone to somewhere else? For the most part, that can be okay also. But, if someone who's really passionate about screenwriting is going to get really bored at an accounting job, right? And if that comes out in your interview, I think you might have an honest conversation with the person and say, it came across that you were really interested in this other thing, and this job isn't going to give you the opportunity to do that. So, maybe I can help you find that other opportunity, but sorry, right? This isn't going to be a great fit for you.
Yeah. I mean, we have questions. So what's your interpretation of great or dull questions candidates offer when the interviewer asks, what questions do you have for us?
Great questions, I think, are, specific to the role, that show you did your research, right? You know what the company's doing or what the specific team is doing, and you can kind of dive into some more details about that role. Typically, poor questions are things like, how many hours do you guys work, right? Like, that's kind of an indication to me of, can I clock out at 5? And that's okay for some jobs, but some jobs are not 9-to-5 jobs, right? I think some jobs are just, by their nature, you're going to be thinking about the work, after 5 o'clock, and that's just how some jobs are, and that's okay. But if you're really just looking for a clock in, clock out kind of paycheck job, for the roles that I hire, that's not okay.
Right. Yeah, for me, there were definitely several candidates who didn't have questions, and so I would say before the interview, have some questions, because someone's going to ask you, do you have any questions?
Right.
And so it just looks like you're more interested and engaged when you do have a question.
Yeah. And I love hearing the questions of what are some challenges that you're facing? What are the challenges that your team is facing? What are the challenges of the company? Because that kind of sparks the conversation of, well, here's some areas that we could improve on, and that gives the candidate an opportunity to go, well, I know how to do that, or I can help contribute in that way. Here's what I bring to the table, right?
Yeah, we had another question a while ago that asked you, Sairam, about professional online, like LinkedIn.
Yeah.
What's your take on when it comes to hiring a person, like their LinkedIn profiles?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I'm usually pretty happy to connect with people on LinkedIn, even if I don't know them very well. So more often than not, someone will reach out to me to connect, and I'll say, sure, I'm happy to talk to you, or happy to, if it's someone that I interviewed, I might not, be so forthcoming about how they did in the interview, especially if they didn't get the job. But I'm always happy to connect with people. I think it's really interesting what happens with people's careers when you track them on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Yeah, and our last tip was what you bring. So this one was, so granted we were interviewing high school interns, and the experience was limited in terms of what to put on a resume. And so there was a lot of just high school courses that were listed, the GPA. So I'm curious from your perspective, like, what do you do with that information?
So this is a tough one. I think, again, it really depends on the role, and GPA only goes so far to give you a picture of what this person might be like in a work environment. I didn't have a great GPA in university, right? Honestly, I didn't. I know a lot of really brilliant engineers who flunked out completely or didn't have a great GPA like I did. So for engineering positions, it's not a great indicator, honestly, of how good you're going to be as an engineer. Because engineering, I think, is, again, this is very personal. Like for me, this is my experience. It's very much an art form, and very much a art science of solving problems creatively, right? And that doesn't it's not easy to test in a university environment. It's not easy to learn. It's something that you kind of learn by doing over a long period of time. So for me, I think one of the things that came across well in interviews were people who would say, hey, here's experience that I have specifically that relates to what your team is doing, or what your company is doing. And that tells me a lot more than I got an A in this class, or a B in that class, or I did this project in school.
Yeah. Yeah, I would have liked to have seen more, because we did just host an internship for the candidates. I would have liked to have seen more specifics of how to take what they learned during the internship that was applicable to what we were asking them to do in this next iteration. So I would have liked to have seen more description of what, and even they had come with lots of other experience, maybe from clubs and maybe from leadership roles at school, to tease out more of that and less space on the courses and that information. So then to me, it's what you bring that's relevant to the job that makes you an asset versus what you have from school. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, and that's tough for people early in their career, right? When you're in high school, especially, right? You haven't done that much.
No.
So I think it's, you can put in some extracurriculars, and if you're creative with how you explain what you did there, you can certainly talk about leadership, and you can certainly talk about, I organized meetings, or I organized, people to go do this event or volunteer at this thing, right? Volunteer opportunities are always available. And the more you do that, the more involved you get. And the more involved you get, the more of a leadership position you can take. And that's super interesting to me. And that doesn't cost you anything, and you can do it anytime, right?
Yep. And then there was a question that popped up. If we could have, so Sairam, have you seen the job market change throughout your career? And can you give any tips on how to keep up with the changes?
It's changed a lot. It's changed a lot since I was an intern at Symantec almost 30 years ago. I think you have to be learning all the time. You have to constantly be changing, and very much open to change. You can't be a curmudgeon and say, I don't know how to do that thing, so I'm not ever going to do it, and I'm never going to learn it. And we used to do it this way. So you have to kind of adapt, right? To be very adaptable in this environment. I think maintaining relationships is the biggest thing that's been a constant for me. I didn't realize it at the time, but when I was very young, I built a network, and for me, it was just making friends. And then the more friends I made, the more friends I had, and then I could call people and say, "Hey, I see you're working on this thing. Can we talk about that? I'm interested in that." And it was very easy to have those conversations because they were just friends. So I think now, in retrospect, that's what I was doing. I was building a network, and I think that's something that anyone can do and should be doing if you want to, maintain your career progression into interesting things that interest you, basically.
It's so true, because what I didn't tell folks earlier is that Sairam and I have known each other, a long time. So Sairam went to high school with my husband, and Harlan and I have been together since 1993. So that's when I met you, Sairam.
Yeah.
So that was a long time ago, and it's pretty awesome. I mean, our paths have crossed during school, then weddings and
Yeah.
and to be able to do this with you right now is super awesome, and I'm so excited. And so, yeah, I just didn't know if any others had any questions or any final thoughts, Sairam, before we kind of say bye. Yeah.
I'd love to take any other questions.
Yes, adaptability for sure. I mean, just to give perspective, I remember writing my high school papers on a typewriter.
Yeah. Yeah. Typewriters. Oh man. Electric typewriters with loud. Yeah.
I didn't even have electric. I mean,
wow.
Maybe electric. I had one that was not electric, and then electric. And then remember when it was like we had dot matrix printers in college,
right?
With the holes, right? You had to like rip the.
Yep. Yeah, those things are super expensive now because there's still people who depend on them, so you can't even find them.
Anyways, so even just, I remember having to go to the computer lab, and it's changed a lot, right?
Yeah.
It's so awesome. So we actually have our interns chiming in on the stream. That's so. I'm just making sure.
I'd love to know from the intern's perspective, from the candidate's perspective, how things went in that interview. Did they feel like, they knocked it out of the park, or did they feel like, oh, I didn't get that job. I really worked hard on that interview and I didn't think I was going to get it. Like I'm very self-critical. So I go into interviews, and no matter how well or badly I did, I come out of it going, there's no way I got that job. I'm very pessimistic about my own abilities. But
I'd be curious if those of you who participated, what your feedback, what your thoughts were from the interview, from the hiring process.
Skills weigh more than charisma during an interview. Do they weigh more? If you don't have the technical skills in an engineering interview, you won't get the job no matter what your charisma is. It's just not going to happen. So there's just a baseline of, here's the minimum you need to bring to the table to even be considered for the job, which is true in every profession, right? Like, you're not going to be considered for a job as a doctor if you've never gone to medical school and know anything about human anatomy. So I think that's just, you need the basic technical skills to do the job before anyone's even care what your charisma or your personality is like. But the personality questions, at least at Amazon, we're very much focused on a history of what were called Amazon's leadership principles, right? Do you demonstrate bias for action? Do you demonstrate customer obsession? Do you demonstrate an ability to dive deep into a problem and figure out the root cause? Do you show ownership, right? All these things, and they're all posted on Amazon's website. If you ever apply to Amazon, you can just go look at what they look for. And I think that's, it doesn't matter what job you're applying for, what company you're applying for, but I'd say go look at those things and have stories, right? Have personal stories of things that you've done for each of those things. And any job you apply to, you'll be able to adapt one of those stories to the question that's being asked. I think that's one key that just works really well in interviews. Like, have enough confidence when you come into it to say, you're asking me a question about, my strengths or my weaknesses or whatever. And I have an example where I made a poor decision, and here's how I recovered from it. Here's how I communicated that poor decision. Because that's another question I ask. I tend to ask, can you give me an example of a time where you made a decision that was just wrong, was just the wrong decision? How did you handle it? How did you handle communicating it to the people that were affected? And that says a lot about someone's ability to be proactive about, hey, I have some bad news, and how can we work through this? How can we mitigate the result?
Yeah, so we're getting some of the comments from. So yes, we were fortunate that we did have relationship with many of those who we interviewed. So
that's making your interviewers laugh is huge. That makes a big difference. It really does. Coming in with a lot of energy makes a big difference, especially on Zoom, right? I think in person you can at least lean in and hear someone who's a little bit shyer, and soft spoken. But if you're that kind of, and honestly, like I think I used to be, but I've really kind of found a way to project more, especially in interviews. And you have to demonstrate energy. You have to show that you're a high energy person, because if you come across as being a low energy person, you're not going to give a great impression that that's kind of what your working leader is going to be like, right? Bring lots of energy to your interviews. Yeah,
definitely. And it is. We had to do virtual interviews, and it is important to have that energy and all of those things, right? To make sure all the technology work, to make sure you look professional, to make sure you sound and you have all of that presence. And so those are just some things to really, pay attention to.
Right.
But yes, and breathing, right?
Take your breath.
Right. And slow down. Yeah. I feel like, so I don't know. Let's see. That's all I had. Anything else? Yeah, this is our longest one we've done. So
cool.
Yeah, thanks, Sairam.
Of course, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, and I know this is so great. Thank you, Sairam. Thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks to all of us who all the behind the scenes folks. And we'll see